Poplar Grove round two. I'm so thrilled that we have our friend Adam Goodheart here, who was kind of the major driving force behind this preservation and reclamation of these documents. And we also have Jeremy Rothwell and Albin Kowalewski, and I believe we're going to have Dr. Papenfuse. And we have so many people and so much to say that I'm not going to tell you much in the introduction here, except to just say welcome, and I'm glad you're all here. We are going to keep everybody muted during this so that we can all hear and so that it doesn't get too confusing, but I encourage you to please use the chat as much as you like to ask questions, leave comments, and we'll try to have our discussion that way so that we can strike that balance between being able to hear people and allowing for as much participation as possible. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Adam Goodheart, who is our good friend and a really wonderful writer and amazing historian from Washington College, and he will then turn it over to the next person after that.
Thanks so much, Mariah, and thanks for hosting this event. It's exciting to have everybody who worked on the Poplar Grove project again after a dozen years. This is just great, at least virtually. So I'm just going to spend 5 minutes talking about sort of the genesis of this project, and then hand it off to some of my colleagues from the project who will talk about some of the specific discoveries that we made. So I'm going to show you a few images since a picture is worth 1,000 words. Except that it doesn't seem to be sharing correctly. Interesting.
I can see your.
Well, can you see it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, great. I can't see it, but that's all right. So this house that that you're seeing right now, Poplar Grove, is in Queen Anne's County, and is a place where I've been taking my students just about ever since I got to Washington College and started teaching, because it really is a place where you feel like you're stepping into the past. When I'm taking my students there, we go down 213 to Spaniard Neck Road, if you know where that is, just north of Centerville. We come down, okay, I'm not gonna be able to share this PowerPoint, so I'm trying to quit and restart here. So I really do want you to see these pictures.
I was able to see that image, but I guess
yeah, I just wouldn't
navigate
be able to advance the slides. I'm opening it now. Thanks everybody for your patience.
We are all flexible and adaptable after the last 8 months, I think.
By the way, it's great to see so many friends of Washington College, some students and faculty, and so many folks from the community here. So can you see it again now?
Yes.
Okay, great. And now I'll be able to actually control it. So this house, Poplar Grove, which is a mysterious place, no one has ever been able to figure out exactly how old it is, except at least parts of it go back at least as far as the early 18th century. So when I'm taking students to this place, we go down 213, we go down Spaniard Neck Road, we turn down a long dirt driveway. And I always say to my students, fasten your seatbelts, we are now leaving the 21st century. Because there's not only this incredible house, There's also the family graveyard, where we usually will go in when we get there and pay our respects to the Emory ancestors, the people whose descendants owned this farm for the past 13 generations since the 1660s. And we're also always greeted by members of the Emory and Wood family, who were the lovely proprietors, and not just keepers of the house, but keepers of many of the stories of this remarkable place. And here you see on the left, that's Mariah's late grandfather, Howard Wood, whose memories of this place went back nearly a century and passed away some years ago. This picture was taken on my very first visit there with students in 2003. And Mariah's uncle, James Wood, who's the terrific steward of the house today, and whose daughter, Olivia, you'll be hearing from in just a little bit. But the other miraculous thing that this house had when I visited there with my students more than a decade ago was this incredible collection of family papers. As you can see, they are archived here according to the best archival system of the Eastern Shore of Maryland, namely stuffed into old peach baskets and lard cans and cartons and steamer trunks of various sorts. So they looked, when we saw them for the first time, a bit like a mess. And in fact, even messier when we started digging into these stacks of documents. And you can see here what they looked like. The mice and the insects had been getting to them for many years. And yet they held extraordinary treasures. On top here, you can see a document dated 1707. The earliest documents that we found dated to the 1660s, some land deeds. And they stretched all the way up to somebody's credit card statements from the 1980s. So really just a panorama of American history, of Eastern Shore history, and the history of this place called Poplar Grove, that was not just the home of one family, as I said, the Emorys and their ancestors and descendants, but also a family a plantation that was really a community in which a majority of the residents over the centuries were African American. And we found, as you'll hear, some remarkable documents that chronicled the history of that African American community as well. But it was definitely a challenge to work with. I think the former state archivist of Maryland, Dr. Edward Papenfuse, will be telling you a little bit about that. But extraordinarily rich. It turned out eventually that there were some 30,000 pages of documents. And there were surprises tucked away throughout the house. Up in the attic here, forgive the not great photo, in one of those steamer trunks, we found a bundle of papers that were letters between two teenagers in the first decade of the 19th century. And we unfolded them for probably the first time since shortly after they were written. In one of them, we even found one of these teenagers had sent a lock of his own hair to the other one. So here, this 14-year-old boy who was clearly kind of a redhead, clipped off a lock of his hair, and it just, as he wrote about his crushes on various of the ladies of Chestertown in 1804, it just felt like we were sort of eavesdropping on like text messages between two teenagers in recent times. It was just an incredible contact with history. We had a team of wonderful Washington College students and recent graduates, joined by Olivia Wood, who was a student then at Rhodes College in Tennessee, who came in and, under the guidance particularly of Dr. Papenfuse from the State Archives, took those papers out, archived them, and began a process of organizing them and creating a finding aid for them. That's Abby Kovaleski 12 years ago, whom you will be seeing in a few moments, looking even more distinguished, but with slightly less hair than when he was a newly graduated Washington College student. And you can also see that Abby is wearing a mask and gloves. And that's because, as you could see, these papers had all kinds of things infesting them over the years, to the point where we actually nicknamed them the mouse turd papers. That's the condition that they were in. But they really were remarkable for their richness, and also the fact that they really hadn't been tapped into by historians. This is a particularly rich bundle of papers that I came across with one of my students that actually been pulled out and sort of separately preserved by the family. And it's a bundle of correspondence between Major William Hemsley Emory, who was a member of the family, who was an officer in the US Army at the outbreak of the Civil War. It says there, correspondence of W.H. Emory and wife in regard to his resignation from the US Army, 1861. Clearly, this had been bound up tightly in those silk ribbons for at least a century. And when we untied the ribbons, we found an amazing correspondence of this man in Maryland in 1861, trying to figure out whether he wanted to stick with the Union, the United States, whose flag he had served under for his entire lifetime since he was a teenage cadet at West Point, or whether he wanted to cast his lot with the fledgling Confederacy, which in many ways he viewed himself as a Southerner coming from Maryland and having grown up on a plantation worked by enslaved people. Within that bundle of documents, there were such inspiring stories that I really found myself drawn into this moment in history when the Civil War, rather than being a conflict playing itself out on famous battlefield after famous battlefield, was a moment when millions of ordinary Americans, men and women, black and white, North and South, were trying to figure out what to do at this precipitous, momentous moment of American history. And that actually inspired me to write a book whose title was taken from one of the words on this wrapper on the bundle of papers that you see, 1861, The Civil War Awakening. So that's just a little bit of an introduction to what we found there, so you could see it. And now I'm happy to introduce my former student and friend, Jeremy Rothwell, who is going to tell you a little bit about some of the specific documents that we found and that particularly inspired him. Jeremy, are you with us?
I'm pretty sure Jeremy's here. Thank you so much, Adam. I can't wait to go back and listen to that part again, because I have never heard some of these sort of experiences that you guys had as you delved into these papers. So it looks like maybe Jeremy is not here at the moment.
Yeah, I am not seeing him either. Oh, there he is. He's muted, however.
Oh, well, we're gonna have to unmute him.
He's, for me, on page 2.
Let me find him.
Looking distinguished in a green tie and V-neck sweater. See Helen Wood on this call, whom I should mention, who is another member of the Emory and Wood family who was involved in the early days of saving those papers. Actually, even before we started working with them in 2008, we started what turned into sort of an abbreviated process in 2003 of rescuing some of those papers. Jeremy, can you?
Yes. I think I've rescued Jeremy.
Thank you, Mariah, if you don't mind pulling my slides up. But for those of you who don't know me, I know many of you on this call. I'm Jeremy Rothwell. I work as a town planner and economic development director for the town of Smyrna, Delaware. I deal with historic preservation and serve in a number of historic preservation agencies and organizations with my career and in my personal life. So as a planner, I suppose my greatest interest is what happens to the physical world, what happens to landscapes. And those were, I found, some of the most intriguing things of these papers. So to give the context, to go a little further than Adam, this is an 1877 map of Queen Anne's County. Colonel J.R. Emory is shown at the center of this map. And if looking up, I looked it up yesterday, in the 1860 agricultural census, J.R. Emory owned 650 acres of essentially cropland or improved farmland and 350 acres of woodland, valued at $25,000, with $500 worth of farming implements and $3,000 worth of livestock. Now, to give you a comparison, there were only 11 farms in the 1860 that were valued at $25,000. the largest property, most expensive property, was owned by William Paco on Y Island, valued at $71,000. And the second most expensive property is that Adam Goodheart can appreciate was owned by Richard Bennett Carmichael, which was valued at $50,000. So J.R. Emory was among the most expensive landowners and the wealth of landowners in Queen Anne's County at the time. So Mariah, if you go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we found hundreds of agricultural papers and receipts, which was a bit difficult to decipher, but when we separated them by year, and by doing that, what I'm going to do is just show you a snapshot of what the farm would have produced in 1881. So in this particular receipt, this was one of 5 grain shipments that were sent from Poplar Grove Farm by boat. You can see the name of the schooner at the top, schooner by the name of Captain Jones, that was sent to the city of Baltimore to a grain merchants by the name of J.M. Parr and Son. So they sent 2,842 bushels of red wheat valued at around $3,509. Now, J.M. Parr was a grain merchant. They were middlemen who sold this grain to individual mills in the Baltimore area. So those are shown here in the center. So W.E. Goodyear and Company was one of the mills in the city of Baltimore, for instance. Okay, the freight and the measuring, the freight went to the schooner and the schooner captain. The measuring and commission went to the middleman, J.M. Parr and Sons. And then the Edward B. Emory was able to keep the rest. So you can go to the next slide, please. All right, there we go. Very good, thank you. So they just didn't, sorry, thank you. So we're not just doing grain here. So they sold grain and corn, but they also sold fruit. This is in the 1880s. This is the high point of peach production on Delmarva. And from August the 4th to September the 22nd, the farm made 31 shipments of fruit, primarily peaches, but also pears and apples, to the city of Baltimore. And each day, each shipment was given a receipt just like shown here. There were a total of 29 days. So there were actually 2 instances where they did 2 shipments in one day. You can go to the next slide. So what is all that?
Uh-oh.
You're good.
Oh, okay.
There we go. You got it? So in 1881, this farm sold approximately $3,870 worth of red wheat, $758 worth of yellow corn, 382 bushel baskets of yellow peaches, and 20 baskets of pears and 2 baskets of apples, totaling $1,021. So in 1880 money, this farm, just in crop sales, made approximately $5,649.95. If you translate that into 2020 money, this farm made a net farm sales for crops, $144,130.22. Now, we don't know exactly. There may have been a couple receipts that we missed, but I think this shows a fairly complete picture of what farm life would have been in terms of how this farm made money for both the family and the community. What this doesn't tell you is this, this is post 1865. It doesn't tell you the cost of labor. We never found any of those receipts. So you can go next slide. So it wasn't just crops that they were using to make money. So we found a number of these. These are licenses from the state of Maryland to be able, essentially this is a stud license. This allows E.B. Emory to be able to breed a particular stallion, a stallion by the name of Cyclops, which we found a lot of receipts for. Okay, this receipt dates from 1880, around the time of the grain receipts that we found. So you can go to the next slide. And it wasn't just again, wasn't just even horses here. So E.B. Emory was a very large proprietor of breeding other different farm animals, including lambs, calves, and pigs, as well as horses. So, and this is one of his advertisements. We found probably 50 of these in the papers. So he was obviously giving them out to different individuals and mailing them out to different individuals. What I would draw your attention to is the cost of trotting bred yearling stud colts and stud fillies. Even in that time, and even in today's time.
Uh-oh, I hope we didn't lose Jeremy.
1880.
Oh, there he is.
So we can go to the next slide. Last slide, please.
Got it?
Oh, not yet.
I don't know. There seems to be a lag. Okay.
There we go. We got it now. All right. So in closing my section of it, I just want to talk about in terms of what does all this mean for economics? How do people shop? How do people do business? So this is actually, we found a lot of Tillman receipts in the papers. The Emorys were the executor for a number of different Tillmans throughout the generations. And this receipt here tells a very good story that I think really goes in terms of what is the connection of Queen Anne's County and this farm to the rest of the world and the rest of the state of Maryland. So this is post, this is already since the railroad has come to town. And how are they selling produce? They're selling it by boat, by a schooner, okay? They're selling it directly to merchants in Baltimore who are then selling it throughout Baltimore or throughout the world, okay? And then look down. So look down at the bottom half of the page, and what you'll see is this is actually the farmer's grocery list. They are going and the grain merchant is essentially doing their shopping for them, okay? And then deducting that from their net pay. So they are purchasing 6 gallons of whiskey, okay? 25 pounds of Java coffee, 5 pounds of macaroni, 2 6-pound boxes of candles, 25-pound cut loaf of sugar, 1 large cheese heart, 3 pounds of Japanese tea, okay? They're not doing their shopping locally. They're shopping from Baltimore. And then look at the bottom line, deposited in the Bank of Baltimore. The families here, the larger families on the shore, were not banking locally. They were banking in Baltimore. So that has a huge effects in how that affects the local economy, okay? Because everything was centered around the city of Baltimore. Baltimore was the economic hub for Maryland and all of the outlying communities. So farms like Poplar Grove had a greater connection to Baltimore City and the rest of Maryland perhaps today than, in 1880 or in 1800 than they do today. So I think that's an important thing to remember. But with that,
Jeremy,
I'm going to introduce my next colleague.
Jeremy, before you move on, we do have a question in the chat, which I believe is from Dr. Papenfuse, which says, how much was the freight by the schooner? How much did the freight cost?
So in this particular instance, the schooner charged a freight of $41.89. Okay, so judging from the receipts that we found, in some instances, especially with the peaches, they were only transporting a few bushel baskets of peaches in a day from this particular farm, meaning that schooners were going to every single farm along the waterfront, picking up their peaches, picking up their grain, and taking it to Baltimore. So it's a very different economic system than what you have today, okay? But it is an economic system where farmers were able to make significantly more money. Okay, right. So with that, I can introduce my next colleague. I'm very pleased to introduce a classmate of mine who graduated on time, unlike myself, who's a 2007 graduate of Washington College, and he is a 2009 graduate of East Tennessee University and he now works as an historian at the Office of the Historian at the U.S. House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. I believe he's commuting. He's working remotely from home in New Jersey right now. But I'm very happy to introduce Albin Kowalewski. So with that, and I believe you have to just.
Yep, I am working on unmuting him. There you go. I think, Abby, I think you're good.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy and Adam, for that introduction. I don't know that I'm any more distinguished than I was, but I'm certainly balder than I was back in 2008 when we first discovered the Poplar Grove papers. As Jeremy said, I'm a 2007 graduate of Washington College. I did graduate work at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And right now I am senior editor at the Office of the Historian at the United States House of Representatives. And in some respect, I have my current job, maybe I owe it a little bit to having worked on the Poplar Grove papers. And I say that because, excuse me, in addition to the print publications that I manage and I oversee, I'm also in charge of editing a blog where we seek to tell, you know, kind of interesting stories about the House of Representatives that take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes to read, that try to convey stories that people might not know about a pretty complex institution. And it's perhaps fitting that the first blog that I ever wrote was for the Poplar Grove Project. And so today I want to take a quick second to pull back a little bit. I don't have any documents to share, unfortunately, but I do want to talk about not just the historical value of the collection, but its value in the act of doing history, of taking and interpreting the past and making sense of it. In 2008, you know, I think we were kind of on the front lines of this new way of communicating with the public, of taking, like I said, complex issues and presenting them in a way that people can access them and in ways that people can understand them better. And so I remember when we first sat down to talk about doing the blog, I was probably a little bit hesitant. I didn't necessarily think that it was going to be a big part of what we were going to do. But then when we started going through the papers and making these discoveries and finding things that people hadn't seen in some cases in 200 years, it became imperative that we wanted to share this sort of stuff and to open access and to make it available. And so, you know, we didn't write a whole number of blog posts about the Poplar Grove papers. I think it was probably close to a dozen or so. I went back and read them the other day, but they were super interesting. And the idea that people would invest their time in the blog and in what we were doing was also kind of an inspiration for what we were doing as we processed the papers and whatnot. And it also got me thinking about how all the history that's not being done today because of the pandemic, because people can't travel to archives, because people can't access the resources that they otherwise would have. The other side of that coin is because of the work that guys like Ed and Adam have done to take these records and to digitize them and to make them available to the broader public, it's still possible to do a lot of history based on what's available online now. And I think, I don't want to brag and I don't want to say that the Poplar Grove Project was responsible for that, but I do think that the decision to take those papers and to digitize a lot of them and then to talk about them using a public blog that generated media coverage and whatnot, I do think we were on the leading edge of what is today kind of a major way of doing history. You know, there's a reason why 2 or 3 years after we did the Poplar Grove blog that the New York Times did their Remarkable Disunion series on the 150th anniversary of the Civil War. You know, there's a reason why the Washington Post has an entire history blog associated with it. There's a reason why, you know, academic historians are writing for CNN and NBC and stuff like that. And I think a lot of it has to do with just how important and pivotal it is to take these super interesting stories and to make them available to the public and to help us kind of think about the past and the present in new ways. And so in that regard, the Poplar Grove Project and working on the Poplar Grove Project set both kind of my career in motion, and I think it was telling of where the profession in general was headed. And I think it's, you know, public history today is more vibrant than, you know, than it's ever been. So we have Adam and Ed to thank for that as well.
That's great. And I think, so thank you, Abby. I just put in the chat that I think I was remembering the 1619 project that the New York Times did last year that I think is another kind of descendant of the Poplar Grove blog in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing what people are doing nowadays. And you know, it was fun to kind of be on the front edge of that back then.
And I don't know about this year, but there have been some comments on the Poplar Grove blog that came in many years after 2008 that I found, I think when we were getting ready for the last Salon with Olivia. So it is still in some ways a living document.
Cool.
So I think that Dr. Papenfuse is here and ready to speak to us.
A man who needs no introduction. State Archivist, Maryland State Archivist.
Are we set?
We are set.
Okay. It's a pleasure to be with you all and to see so many of you again. It was a great time. What I thought I'd say very quickly is that I think we really were pioneers, and that the way in which we approached an absolutely overwhelming problem and brought it within 2 years to a place where the public could actually see what we went through is something that I'm extraordinarily proud of. And I think it really relates to Adam's enthusiasm and direction. It relates to the good work that each one of you did. So what I thought I would do for just a moment is to take you back, because it just so happens that I did some filming. And it's not very good, but it really gives you a good sense of what we are up against. And Olivia, you'll recognize yourself. So let's go to my shared screen. Now, forgive me on the awkwardness of this. I will do this as smoothly as I can, but we need to go, let's make sure I'm on the right screen, which I should be. All right, now you don't need to look at that, but what you need to look at, do you see the Power Media Player?
Yes.
Does everybody see the Power Media Player? Okay, that's good, because sit back and enjoy.
We're in a house, and there's all of these boxes and barrels, as you can see, 19th century tin lard cans and old laundry hampers and wooden peach crates, all full of papers with vines growing in through the windows. And obviously various critters have been making meals of this stuff here and there. And my students just got really excited seeing what was here and started opening up some of these boxes and looking at papers next. Now, you know, these are the family's private papers. You might not want to be going through all this stuff, but they got so excited that we all started looking through it and realizing that there was really a treasure trove here that we hadn't imagined.
Adam has put together a very good brief history of the family to give us some idea of what we might encounter as we go through these papers. The objective today is to just get everything into standard regular center boxes, box stuff. Anything that can be folded will be folded. Books will be put into bags. It's because some of them need to be treated, but you know, we may find all kinds of things, including this artifact.
I hadn't seen this before.
Of the vote.
It's beautiful, handmade, probably 19th century.
Like a toy boat that they
Right. Well,
Yeah.
this is a family home, and you will find scattered throughout it. For example, upstairs in the attic, which we won't take you because there's a fairly large population of honeybees in the window. When we got into one of the trunks, we opened up the trunk, and in the trunk, one of the women in the family had very carefully kept bits and pieces of lace and the kinds of things we might use for dresses and for making quilts and that sort of thing. And as we went through it and got down to the bottom of it, all of this correspondence lay there between a brother and a sister, all of it dating from, what was the
1801,
1801, 1802. And so we're moving ourselves rapidly back to, you know, the first era of the nation.
What sorts of things were in the letters written?
Well, see, that's one of our, where we are right now is we're just collecting, identifying.
Yes.
The rest of the summer is going to be processing and explaining. So we really don't know much about the content except a few things, which we'll show you. For example, I mean, this property for a very long period of time was owned by Thomas Emory. And Thomas Emory was a general in the War of 1812. He was instrumental in bringing the railroad to the Eastern Shore. He was very active in politics. He was a state senator. He was very active in many ways, and actually Adam can tell you a lot more about him than I can at this point. We're expecting to find a great deal of material relating to his involvement here on this farm. Particularly, we think it's going to be richest in the 1830s on to the Civil War, but I'm also hoping we find some materials relating to his activities during the War of 1812, because he was very prominent in the defense of Maryland at that point. But as you go through, yes, here's an example where Adam just simply picked up. Yes, why don't you?
He was very prominent in politics around here. And for instance, this is a sheaf of political handbills from an election in 1830. Cover how big there was probably about a dozen copies of the same handbill.
Let's start this. Just take any box. We're just going to move all this stuff down to the kitchen, into that corner where we took the boxes. Okay. Okay. And then I'll give you a hand. Just keep the books separate from the papers to the best of your ability, because we will pack up the books separately.
I hope you recognize the suspenders.
Handbill got up in the notorious by the no less notorious version of
We're now in the first stages of cleaning, flattening, and boxing. And this door probably has some of the worst we're going to have to deal with today, in all likelihood. Libby, you want to say anything for posterity? Posterity? Not posterior, but posterity? Sorry about that.
I apologize for my family's lack of organization.
No, wait a minute now. You can't be responsible for this. You're going to be responsible for making it whole better.
Well, that's basically an introductory I'll get out of this. All right, and come back. I'll leave it at that, except to say that it was a wonderful experience with all of you. And Olivia, the transcriptions that you did and the way in which you expressed the story of those letters was fantastic, and they can find it now on the blog. The point I would like to make, however, is that this project was incomplete. We didn't finish. We did not produce the guides and indexes that I hoped we would be able to do from the images. And that still remains to be done. And I would highly recommend that a group sourcing project be underway, hopefully through Washington College, linked to the images that we put online. Because that process of moving things from an absolute chaos to putting them as images online was revolutionary in the way in which we did it. There is no other archival project that was ever undertaken to try and get that much material in such bad shape into a place where it could really be used and accessed and done with just as well as Jeremy just did with regard to looking at the history of agriculture on the shore or looking at the problem of the slaves. I mean, it's very interesting to see that there was quite a bit of discussion in the family, both quiet and evidence in the letters, that there was support for some of the runaways that the owner was not very keen on. But in fact, the women in the family saw to it that it happened. So when we go through looking at this collection, it has huge ramifications for different aspects of the history. What I remember most about all of this was the time that we went into this shed, which was actually a work area, work shed. And we went up onto the second floor. It was really a very shaky place to be. And we started looking through some of the material. We took one box outside. Inside, we found all of these papers relating to oil exploration by one of the Emorys in Venezuela with photographs. But then we went outside to the box. And Adam goes in and he just picks up one piece of paper. And what is it? It's, I think, Tench Cox, but I could be wrong. But at any rate, it related to Philadelphia in the 1780s by one of the great constitutional advocates. Am I right about that, Alan? You need to be Bring me back.
That letter was one of the fascinating ones that we found. I'm glad you brought it up because I promised folks that I would talk about the enslaved community and the incredibly rich information that we found about them. That was a letter, and it was from William Hemsley, who at the time was a delegate to the Continental Congress. I think it was written to Tench Cox.
Yes.
And he was writing about purchasing an enslaved man in Philadelphia while he's a delegate to the Continental Congress. And not only that, but he described the negotiation, the conversation that he had with this enslaved man who had previously escaped from slavery, who had joined the British Navy, as a lot of enslaved people did during the American Revolution, as a means of escaping and finding protection. He had then been captured in battle by the Continental Navy and become a crewman on this Continental Navy vessel. And then he was re-enslaved, and this delegate to the Continental Congress was basically purchasing him and trying to bring him back to his plantation on the Eastern Shore, and was actually negotiating with this enslaved man. And the enslaved man was saying, well, I'll come and be your slave on the Eastern Shore under the following conditions. And it was remarkable. It's not the sort of thing we usually associate with enslavement, but clearly this was a remarkable person who had his own sense of agency, who had run away before and might run away again, and was actually able to sort of dictate terms of his own enslavement. So it was an amazing document for its 18th century history, Revolutionary War history, and most of all for its history of slavery. And I'd never seen anything quite like it. And as Dr. Papenfuse said, it came out of a room in this shed that was literally in the process of collapsing. And I think next to that trunk, there was a dead and desiccated dog carcass lying on the floor. It was really kind of extreme archival conditions that we were working in.
Well, I just want to stress that Adam had a knack for just simply reaching in to some pile of something and pulling out gems. And then when you go from there, he has a wonderful knack of making you really understand the value and making use of it in a very creative way. So anyway.
Well, Dr. Papenfuse is really a legend in not just Maryland history, but Chesapeake history, who was the director of Maryland State Archives for 4 decades and really did a lot to really launch the entire field of Chesapeake history. And I think it says a lot about the Poplar Grove collection that when I was there that day with my students and I called Ed and I said, there's this amazing collection that we've unearthed. I'd love to know if the Maryland State Archives would have interest in this. He literally jumped right in his car, no doubt leaving a number of important other responsibilities in Annapolis. And it was like Superman had just sort of flown in and he was immediately sort of taking off his coat and crawling into these dusty attics as I remember it. So it was something that I think was recognized as extraordinary from the beginning. And it also, I think, was a sign of how extraordinary this was that NPR came out just a week or so after we had found the collection and did a whole feature on All Things Considered about the project. And I am putting that link in the chat section. They still have the story posted if you want to listen to it. And one of the great things about it is that you'll get to hear Mary Wood, who died a couple of years ago at the age of 98, but was the grandmother of Olivia Wood, who's here today, and Helen Wood, who's here today, and was also a great voice of expertise and wisdom on the history of this farm and the history of this family, who contributed immensely to the project and whom we miss a lot. So if you want to hear her talking about this history, I'd recommend you listen to that NPR piece.
And I think we also need to stress the fact that you put together a very good team of people, as we've seen some evidence of already today.
It's really a dream team.
Couldn't have been done if it hadn't been for the people who worked so hard in getting these materials together and then beginning to deal with them in their own way with regard to the blog articles and all the rest. It's really a pleasure to see how well people have also moved on to other things. Olivia, hello.
I'm muting Olivia so that she and James can also speak up if they want. And in the meantime, we do have a question here in the chat that is from an Emory, someone whose last name is Emory. And the question is there any thought of adding in the transcribing tool on the Poplar Grove collection at Maryland Archives?
That's a good question. You'd have to direct that question actually to Tim Baker, who's the present archivist. I had designed an editing tool which accompanied all of those images that you can still see online. But unfortunately, that was not really carried through on. There are other ways now in which all of that collection could be put into a group sourcing indexing environment, which I would strongly urge there be some investigation of. But I'd touch base with Tim Baker to see what the archives is willing to do and able to do with regard to that question. There are a number of good transcription projects. There is, in fact, Transcribus, which is a internationally UN-sponsored environment that allows you to load a great number of images and then to transcribe them as well. But I would touch base with Tim Baker.
So maybe Tim Baker should be our Salon guest sometime in 2021.
I'll touch base with him and see what he likes. I'd also would recommend, there are some people who have written about the collection. I'm particularly thinking of Allison Seiler, who I think most of you know, who now works for the Hopkins Library. And she did a really good master's thesis from the material. I've been trying to encourage her to get it published. But the thesis is a very good one.
There is another question here in the chat, which says, I think I missed the story of how Adam and students actually got to Poplar Grove in the first place. Did the family invite them? And then there's an answer in the chat from somebody I know whose name is Robin Wood. But maybe Adam, you can also give your answer to that question.
Yeah, I really like to teach. When I teach history, I like to teach with primary source documents. And I feel like, you know, if you are studying history and don't go into an archive and kind of get your hands dirty and hold those documents, it's like studying marine biology and never setting foot on a boat. That's really where it happened. So at the very first course that I taught at Washington College in 2003, I started asking around to find out, was there a collection of documents that I could work with my students? Washington College at that point had sort of a minimal archive. It's much better now, so that wasn't really an option. And my friend, the late Professor Davy McCall, professor of economics at Washington College, was friends with the Wood family and said, I think they've got some family papers. So he invited me to dinner with Mary Wood and Howard Wood. They showed me some of the collection from Poplar Grove, and we ended up not just working with those papers, but actually going down to Poplar Grove and touring it with Mary and with Howard, who shared the family history and really first created that connection. Mary herself had written a book actually about some of the history of Poplar Grove based on those documents that were still in the house. So really, we owe everything to Mary, who was just an exceptional person and just one of those figures who sort of made things happen in the world and very, very generously shared history with others. And so I think we might hear from Mary's son, James Wood, and granddaughter, Olivia Wood. And James is the current owner of Poplar Grove, and Olivia may soon be the occupant of Poplar Grove. I hope, Olivia, I'm not giving away any secrets in saying that.
Hi, it's very nice to see everybody, especially to have this little reunion, because I haven't seen all of the people that worked on the Poplar Grove project in the same room since probably 2009. So it's good to see you all, and thank you, Dr. Papenfuse, for sharing that video. I do think the organization has gotten a little better now, and it definitely felt very overwhelming when you were looking at a box that was just full of little tiny fragments. But having the enthusiasm of people like Adam and Jeremy and Abby and Jim and Dr. Papenfuse really helping to get us out of our analysis paralysis, probably, of what to do with them, and get them into the archives. Is sometimes you just need those outside forces to help you.
I think you did ditto. It's been a joy to work with everybody, and you know, it's still happening, I think. And I think one of the cool things when we had the talk at Washington College was we started realizing that the other half of the correspondence that we're finding might surface elsewhere. And some people showed up with a revolver, a plant named after Emory family, just all these other nuggets that you can just tell eventually could be a really cool tapestry. I shared last time about a story about Lady Clifton, billed as the world's fastest racehorse, but it took me 10 years of Googling around as a layperson to understand that story, which was really cool. And the house itself has a story that every time you go in there, you notice a new thing. And I know there's information in those papers that talk about those things you're looking at. And you know, there's a lot of unearthing yet to do, I believe. And so I'm grateful that it's preserved electronically so it won't keep degrading. And that was what I think my talk at Washington College is about entropy, you know, just the constant decaying, dissolving, and change that goes through with the papers. And I would applaud lard cans as an excellent container, because as soon as we took them out of the lard cans and fiddled around with them, the decay escalated. So you guys were Superman and came in and saved the day. Though, you know, even in that interim, there was loss, and I'm feel responsible for some of that. But I'm also glad we captured it. I think there's stories yet to be told. So
I was actually at Poplar Grove earlier today, because as Adam mentioned, my husband Eric, who's out of the camera, he and I have been thinking a lot about tackling the house and renovating the house, which we touched on a little bit in the salon that I did. And I was over there today just working on a few chores that need to be done. And one of them was pulling ivy off of some trees. And I think seeing that video of that box full of teeny tiny scraps and knowing how all those scraps are now in folders, and the letters, some of them have been transcribed, and everything is in an orderly fashion, is a good reminder as we're thinking about this project of renovating a very old house that hasn't been lived in a long time and is very old and full of all kinds of projects. And things like pulling ivy off of trees, that seems like an unending task. It's good to remember that eventually all of that will feel similar to how these papers are, which is organized in boxes with labels, and that people are using them to learn more about Maryland and history, and using them to, like what Jeremy was talking about, you can kind of put the puzzle pieces together. So this is a very helpful thing for me to do this evening after a long day of doing chores that were a bit overwhelming earlier today.
Well, thank you so much. And I want to, because Mary Wood was my grandmother, and I really loved the books that she wrote about. She wrote 2 books about her grandmothers and 2 about my grandfather's grandmothers. And one of those grandmothers was called, or one of the books was called My Darling Alice. And part of it takes place at Poplar Grove. And it is a really a wonderful, evocative and sort of sensuous way to delve into the world of Poplar Grove and the Eastern Shore in an earlier time. And she, I remember her working on these projects, and I didn't really know what they were. I wasn't really that interested. I didn't care, but there would be papers everywhere, and I'd sort of hear conversations about them. And then later when I, read these books again with more interest, I could just feel myself at Poplar Grove, and I could feel these stories coming to life. And I ended up writing about her writing, and she used these primary sources that she had to write these books. And now I'm so happy that this enormous trove of documents is here and able to be used by people anywhere, to continue making those stories come alive so that we can know what got us to where we are today. So I really appreciate Adam and everyone who was part of it, because at the time I wasn't that interested, but now I am. So that's really a wonderful way for things to continue living. And
Right.
I want to thank you all for coming. I'm going to let Anne, who is the RiverArts Arts Alive director, close us out in a minute. But before I let her, I'll just thank you all so much for coming and for being part of the salons, which came out of our wish during the beginning of the pandemic to find ways for people to stay connected to each other and to the community and to, arts and culture of all kinds. And so to have, this is by far the most participation that we've had. And so I thank the wonderful guests that we have for drawing all of you here. And I really appreciate this virtual group that we're able to have and the way that we're able to communicate and stay connected with each other. And with that, I will let Anne, we have little ways that we close these salons out. So I'm going to let Anne go ahead with that.
Well, Mariah, we have one last question from Brooke
Oh,
Hartwood, who asks, is there a reason that the family continued to save such a collection of papers over centuries, or was it just luck? And would any of you like to comment on that?
I would say that it's luck now. And at the time it was just, it's a big house and nobody threw anything away.
I am really sad to tell you that we have a room in this house that in 200 years might very well become a treasure trove for somebody.
They were amazing hoarders, really. I remember one of my favorite finds was the instructions to a washing machine from 1832. And I thought, wow, I thought I was bad at never throwing away old instruction manuals to appliances I no longer own, but that is really kind of an extreme case, but God bless them for doing that.
There's a lot of Woods in the chat that are seconding that. It's just genetics. We just don't throw anything away. But
I'm blushing a lot right now.
I would say I'm pretty good at it about throwing things away, but I think it's like a side effect of seeing all the papers.
That's the perfect segue, because I was going to say, Mariah talked about why we started the salons and the fact that you all are our biggest group by far and how exciting this has been today. So I think we'll do something a little different when we end today, in that we'd like to follow up with everybody with an email and kind of share some of the things that were in the chat. There were a few of you who asked questions when you signed up. And if there's questions that hadn't been answered, we can, get in touch with Adam or Abby or Jeremy or and Olivia and, see if there's any answers. And at the same time, we can share some information with you all. If you have further questions, feel free to email Mariah and me, and we can, share those along. Adam?
Yeah, before we go, while everybody is here who's interested in this stuff, I want to put in a plug for just if you have any collections of family papers, know of any collections of family papers, especially related to Eastern Shore history and especially related to African American history, the Starr Center, and I wish I'd had a chance to talk more about that aspect of this collection, which is maybe the most exciting, but the Starr Center right now is involved in a major effort to preserve and digitize and share the African-American history of the Eastern Shore. So we would love to hear from you. You can find me easily by looking at the Washington College website and putting my name in the search box. And thanks very much.
we'll share your contact info if you don't mind. And, you know, Olivia's question that minded me of one of the things I'd like to include in that follow-up email is I would like Olivia or Mariah to give me a behind the scenes kind of family tree of who's on here today. Like there's Woods and there's Emory's, and then there's the people that worked on the project. And there's 75 people at the top today when we had the most. And it would be nice for us to know kind of how people are connected. So we'll be happy to follow up with you all. And I wanted to just close out with one of the things that struck me about this find when we heard from Olivia initially and today is that so many of the papers weren't big things. They were small things. They were a receipt for something that didn't cost very much. But when all those receipts are taken together, it's those small things that come together to show a bigger story of a life. And so I was going to share some lyrics to one of my favorite songs that just says, "Our lives are made in these small hours, these little wonders, these twists and turns of fate. Time falls away, but these small hours still remain." And I feel like it's the small hours at Poplar Grove that really are what we're getting a glimpse into, the daily life. And we thank you so much for supporting RiverArts and being a part of it. And we always end with a toast. My daughter made me a drink with an umbrella. If anyone else has anything similar, or even just a cup of coffee, cheers to all of you who worked so hard to make this happen. And I can't imagine how all of you found time to be here with us today. So thank you.
Thank you all so much. And we will look for a date for Poplar Grove round 3 at some point in early 2021, maybe.
Thanks so
This is
much.
great.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.